All rise, please. This session of Provincial Court regarding the Desmond fatality inquiry is now open in the name of His Majesty the King, with the Honorable Judge Paul Scovil presiding. You may be seated.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning, Your Honor.
Before I begin, please allow me to again express my sincere condolences to the families and the community who lost Leah, Shanna, Brenda, and Lionel Desmond on the night of January the 3rd, 2017. 6 years ago, in response to requests by the family and a recommendation from the province's chief medical examiner, Dr. Matthew Bowes, then Minister of Justice, the Honorable Mark Fury ordered that an inquiry be held under the Nova Scotia's Fatality Investigations Act. His order, dated February the 14th, 2018, stipulated that the presiding judge produce a written report containing any findings as to the date, time, and place of death, as well as the cause and manner of the deaths of Aaliyah, Shanna, Brenda, and Lionel Desmond, the circumstances of Lionel Desmond's release from the St. Martha's Regional Hospital on January 2nd, 2017, whether Lionel Desmond had access to appropriate mental health services, including treatment for occupational stress injuries, whether Lionel Desmond and his family had access to appropriate domestic violence intervention services, whether healthcare and social service providers who interacted with Lionel Desmond were trained to recognize the symptoms of occupational stress injuries or domestic violence, whether Lionel Desmond should have been able to retain or obtain a license enabling him to obtain or purchase a firearm, what restrictions, if any, applied to accessing federal health records of Lionel Desmond by provincial health authorities or personnel, and any recommendations of the judge about the foregoing matters. Based on that order, this inquiry spent more than 56 days over several years diving into the complex issues surrounding intimate partner violence, mental health services and support for veterans, and access to firearms. The evidence and witness testimony also led the inquiry into some areas that may have been less obvious at the beginning of this journey. Issues related to the accessibility of health care, including mental health services in rural communities, the unique health care needs of African Nova Scotians, and the problems with continuity, completeness, and privacy of an individual's medical records. Tying all that together is the overarching question of whether the Desmond's family's tragic deaths could have been predicted or prevented. I will address this question shortly. Dr. Scott Theriault, Clinical Director of the Nova Scotia Health Authority's Mental Health and Addictions Program, appeared as an expert witness before this inquiry. He stated the following: the prediction of suicide, however, runs into the problem of the so-called base rate problem. Given that suicide is, statistically speaking, a low probability event, any test attempting to assess suicide will, by its nature, have a high false positive rate, as the absolute risk of suicide is low. Dr. Peter Jaffe, one of the most authoritative experts on intimate partner violence in North America, also gave evidence before this inquiry. He stated, domestic homicides appear to be one of the most predictable and preventable of all homicides. How do we reconcile these two statements? It would seem that both are dependent on the observation of individual behavior, and those treating individuals have those treating individuals have the most accurate and up-to-date information available to them. Information contained in a silo assists no one outside of the silo. Indeed, the comments of Dr. Theriault and Dr. Jaffe are predicated on the informational backgrounds being made available to healthcare professionals in a timely and fulsome manner. Based on the evidence presented in this inquiry, it is clear that the institutions healthcare professionals and community members involved could have done a better job sharing information about Corporal Desmond's medical history, as well as his physical and mental state in the days leading up to January the 3rd, 2017. With regards to healthcare information, that information needs to easily follow an individual across federal and provincial boundaries. Individuals, professionals, and otherwise need to take a hard look at the need to disseminate concerns surrounding individuals and work with those whose consent is needed to ensure information flows. It is striking to me that once Corporal Desmond transferred to Nova Scotia, it took many months to ramp up the care that he so desperately needed. This despite time being of the essence. No one person should have a finger pointed at. The issue is systemic, up to and including the events on January the 3rd, 2017. Corporal Desmond was forward-looking as far as therapy and counseling. We can only speculate as to what changed with that attitude just before Corporal Desmond walked into the Leaves and Limbs outfitter and made his fatal purchase of a firearm. Information flow is also crucial to firearms across the country. These officers require access to accurate and timely information to do their jobs properly and help ensure the safety of others. They are tasked with evaluating applications and must decide, based on the information before them, whether to grant a possession and acquisition license for a weapon, often referred to as a PAL, or to place a PAL on review and, if need be, have a firearm removed from that individual's possessions. People who have concerns about the retention of a firearm should take solace that these decisions are also always reviewable by the courts. These observations are merely a brief synopsis of my finding. For a more complete summary, I encourage you to read the full report, which will be available on the inquiry's website following today's proceedings. I will take a few moments now to outline my recommendations for the record. Additional context and the supporting evidence for each can be found in Volume 1 of my report. Recommendation 1. It is recommended that the province of Nova Scotia advocate the federal government to have a case manager assigned to veterans transitioning out of the Canadian Armed Forces. Recommendation 2. That the Rapid Access and Stabilization Program be funded by the province of Nova Scotia to include all regions in Nova Scotia. Recommendation 3, that the province of Nova Scotia liaise with the federal agencies to ensure individuals diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder or other health issues be provided a copy of their health records to be ingested into the Nova Scotia records. Recommendation 4, that the Nova Scotia Health Authority and the Nova Scotia Department of Health and Wellness assess the availability of neuropsychological assessments in the province and, if needed, take steps to ensure that they are more readily available. Recommendation 5, that the Nova Scotia Health Authority continue to update its suicide risk assessment and intervention policy and tools based on the most up-to-date evidence on suicide risk assessment, and continue to train staff engaged in the mental health on the CRAI policy, and a tool be provided adequate funding by the province of Nova Scotia to do so. Recommendation 6, that the Nova Scotia Department of Health and Wellness and the Nova Scotia Health Authority partner with appropriate communities and organizations to provide more comprehensive virtual care to rural African Nova Scotia communities. Recommendation 7, that the Nova Scotia Department of Health and Wellness and the Nova Scotia Health Authority take steps to recruit Black and diverse mental health providers to provide culturally informed and responsive care with an emphasis on training in the areas of psychosocial services, occupational stress, and general mental health and addictions with appropriate provincial funding. Recommendation 8, the Nova Scotia Department of Health and Wellness and the Nova Scotia Health Authority should recruit and provide educational scholarships for Black registered nurses and nurse practitioners with appropriate provincial funding. Recommendation 9. The network of Black mental health providers built from the work of the Nova Scotia Mental Health and Addiction Strategy should be supported and adequately resourced by the province of Nova Scotia. Recommendation 10. The province of Nova Scotia should ensure that funding for the Men's Helpline through the provincial 211 system continue and work to increase public awareness of the websites that provide information for those who encounter intimate partner violence. Recommendation 11. That the province of Nova Scotia embark on a public information campaign across multimedia regarding avenues to access programs relating to intimate partner violence. Further, that any campaign be aware of and refer to African Nova Scotian needs and cultural identity. Recommendation 12. Ensure that frontline professionals in multiple systems such as health, mental health, education, social services, and the justice system are up to date with current information about intimate partner violence, the dynamics in these relationships, the impact of intimate partner violence on children, and the potential for lethality in these cases. This should include an awareness of risk factors, risk assessment, safety planning, and risk management strategies. Recommendation 13. That Nova Scotia institute a police standard requiring all police agencies to utilize an intimate partner violence risk assessment tool in all calls and investigation involving domestic conflict where there is concerning behavior regarding an intimate partner is present, irrespective of the existence of a criminal charge. Recommendation 14. That the Nova Scotia Departments of Justice and Community Service review the high-risk case coordination protocol to deal with cases in which there is no criminal offense, but where there is concerning behavior related to the intimate partner. Recommendation 15. That Nova Scotia Chief's Firearms Officer work with other provinces to ensure that processes are in place to notify when clients of this and other provinces are involved in events that create FIPS, and that's information for police, and to ensure that information is shared in a timely manner. Recommendation 16. That police officers in Nova Scotia receive additional training on proper uniform crime report coding. Recommendation 17. That the province of Nova Scotia advocate with the federal government to have federal policing agencies provide firearms officers across to the Federal Police Database, or PROS. Recommendation 18, that the province of Nova Scotia ensure all steps be taken to have expedited access by Chiefs Firearms Officers to various police databanks, including PROS, Versadatus, and Niche. Recommendation 19, that the province of Nova Scotia encourage the federal government to proclaim and enforce those provisions of Bill C-71, an act to amend certain acts and regulation to firearms, SC 2019, Chapter 9, related to license verification and business record keeping. Recommendation 20, that the province of Nova Scotia advocate the federal government to add under Section 16A of the application for a possession and acquisition license under the Firearms Act include a provision that applicants must disclose any employment restrictions regarding firearms or weapons. Recommendation 21. An applicant for firearms license or renewal of firearms license should be required to give an enduring consent and direction to the Officer of Chief Firearms Officers to allow follow-up with a medical practitioner at any time during the period that the license is valid, and in effect to require the medical practitioners to report changes in the mental health status of the applicants. Recommendation 22. The Office of the Chief Firearms Officer should, in appropriate cases, place certain licenses under review and seek additional medical information, if necessary, to ensure that applicants who have been granted licenses are continuing to meet eligibility requirements and are maintaining good mental health. Recommendation 23, the Office of the Chief Firearms Officer should receive additional funding to facilitate additional and ongoing checks of the mental health status of licensees. Recommendation 24, that the province of Nova Scotia liaise with other province and the federal government to improve the transfer of health records into each other's records databanks. Recommendation 25, to ensure that the recommendations from this inquiry are not lost in the passage of time, the province of Nova Scotia should create a formal implementation committee comprising of senior government officials from relevant departments to oversee the implementation of the inquiry's recommendation. This committee should have at minimum a 5-year mandate and liaise with appropriate federal departments. Now, to come back to the earlier question of whether these deaths could have been predicted or prevented. At the end of the day, it is impossible to say with certainty that had these recommendations been in place when Corporal Desmond left the military, no suicide or homicides would have occurred. But we can say that we could possibly have helped avert the tragic events of January the 3rd, 2017. Finally, I wish to acknowledge and thank those who assisted throughout the inquiry proceedings and in compiling this report. First, the Honorable Judge Warren Zimmer, retired, who led the task of setting up the inquiry and conducting the inquiry proceedings. Next, Inquiry Counsel Alan Murray, KC, and the now Honorable Judge Shane Russell, as well as those counsel who have appeared before the inquiry and the many witnesses who, having to testify, must have found it very difficult. Also, to our support staff at Antigonish, Port Hawkesbury, and Bridgewater, the staff of the Nova Scotia Department of Justice, led by Peter James and Janice Gillis, and finally Jennifer Stairs and Mike McPhee in the Executive Office of the Judiciary, and many others. I thank you all. In closing, this has been an arduous and emotional process, but hopefully also a worthwhile one. So to end, my best wishes to everyone, and again, I thank you all for the participation that you had in this process. Thank you.
All rise. This session of Provincial Court is now closed in the name of His Majesty the King.